And this is what the Evo Psych warriors, I tend to call them Evo Psych tards sometimes when I'm feeling a little bit snippy. But this is what they do. They take non human studies, general Evo Psych theories that have never been proven whatsoever, and apply it over to the human experience. And they say, well, this is the way it is. It's just so. And I don't know who came up with the term just so science. I think maybe it was Peter Wright, so he may deserve another shout out for this. But this is what we're getting from them. They are stamping out there's 7 billion people on the planet with 10 million different kinds of personalities and lived experiences that shape their personalities and who they are. And the Evo Psych people say, here, I'm going to take this baboon study. That's going to tell you everything you need to know about humans and about women and call it a day because it's just so. It's just not so, actually. There is countless flaws in this approach. We're going to be talking about some of those coming up in, here too.
You serious?
Hi, everybody. This is Saad for the Sad Truth. Today, I'd like to briefly discuss an accusation that is commonly levied against the field of evolutionary psychology, namely the idea that evolutionary psychologists engage in just so storytelling and hand-waving arguments whenever they seek to explain a phenomenon, when the reality is that it is the exact opposite that holds true. Typically, evolutionary scientists set their evidentiary threshold at a much higher level than is common of the sciences in general, and certainly the social sciences in particular. And so to make this point, I've included for today's clip a slide which I've often used in some of my lectures. You'll see this slide to the side of my head. I need to be thankful here to my lovely wife who spent about an hour a couple of days ago with me navigating through the hellish world of iMovie to try to come up with the means by which I can split the screen so I can have this side-by-side presentation. So thank you, lovely wife, for helping me navigate through that process. And so if you look at that slide, this is in reference to a near universal known as the waist to hip ratio preference of men in terms of the ideal body type that they seek in women. And we know that that waist to hip ratio preference is set at around 0.7, which is the classic hourglass figure. And so the adaptive argument as to why men would prefer that figure stems from two very clear expectations. One, that that particular body type would correspond to greater health and would also correspond to greater fertility. Now, there is no hand-waving arguments here because studies have indeed been conducted that demonstrate that women who possess that body type are on average healthier and are on average more fertile. So there is absolutely nothing that is just so storytelling about establishing those specific links. Now, how do evolutionary psychologists go about establishing the near universality of that particular preference? Let's see the rigor with which they tackle the problem, and then we can decide whether it's just a bunch of just so storytelling. So if you look at the slide to the side of my head, in the top left-hand corner, you see some figure drawings, one of which corresponds to the 0.7 ratio. And so if you take these figure drawings and ask men from different cultures to identify which of these body types they prefer, they tend to roughly all agree that it's the 0.7 one that they prefer. And this again comes from studies that have been done across quite different cultures. Also, people have looked at statues stemming from several millennia of artifacts, Indian, African, Egyptian, Greek art spanning millennia. So if you do a content analysis of the female statues stemming from those art traditions, you come up with a again, the conclusion that this hourglass figure is one that is preferred. You can also do studies where you look at online female escorts, as I did in a study that I published in 2008. So if you see the image with all the attractive female escorts on this slide, this was a study wherein I did a content analysis of 48 countries. So female escorts from 48 countries. This is via the internet, where I coded, rather, it was my undergraduate research assistant who coded morphological features of these online escorts, their weight, their height, their age, and their waist to hip ratios. And the score that I obtained, the average score, was at 0.72. So already we have quite a bit of evidence that suggests that this 0.7 number is quite prevalent. There's also been studies looking at Playboy centerfolds spanning several decades, and it again matches roughly the 0.7. If all this is not enough, I can also tell you that these preferences have been elicited using traditional paper and pencil tasks, using eye tracking methodology, using functional magnetic resonance imaging or brain imaging, whereby the researchers showed that men's pleasure centers are more likely to light up when exposed to photos of women that possess that 0.7 waist to hip ratio. You could also look at pre and post operative cosmetic surgeries and show that women who engage in such a practice seek to ameliorate their body types to fit the 0.7 ideal. And again, this comes from different cultures. And if all of this evidence is still not enough for you, then you could take, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner of the slide, there I show a blind man. And so three brilliant researchers a few years ago did a study where they took congenitally blind men. So these are men who've never had the gift of eyesight. And they had them go through a task to elicit their waist to hip ratio preferences, and they chose a waist to hip preference of 0.7. Now you might say, well, how did they go about doing such a task, since obviously they can't see? Well, it turns out that they applied a haptic paradigm. They actually touched mannequins that had different body types, different waist to hip ratios, and they chose the one that corresponds to the hourglass figure. So they certainly couldn't have been socialized into that preference, since by definition they've never been able to see any media images and so on. So taken together, you've got data stemming from extraordinarily different methodologies, different paradigms, different cultures, all of which point to this near universal preference of 0.7. By the way, I call it near universal and not universal, precisely because evolutionary psychologists also recognize that men's waist to hip ratio preferences can change as a function of local niches. So in environments where there is a recurring and endemic caloric scarcity, or say for example famines, then men's body type preferences will shift towards a higher waist to hip ratio. And so this demonstrates the malleability of preferences. So it might start off with a preference of 0.7, but it could be tuned one way or the other depending on local niches. And so the idea that, for example, evolutionary psychology is genetic determinism is absolutely false, as demonstrated by the example that I just gave. And so those who proclaim that evolutionary psychologists engage in just so storytelling are either profoundly ignorant about the field, and or they are so ideologically driven in their disdain for evolutionary theory that they're willing to ignore this reality, if only to demonstrate resistance against the field.